What's up, Team 116? So, we are on a journey through the Bible with the story series, flying from Genesis to Revelation. Last week, we looked at three major moments after creation where we saw how God establishes the path to Him and makes it very clear what that is, but we complicate that path and try to make up our own. But even when we fail at following His path, He will provide for us to help us get back on, because He wants us to be on that path. Well, this week we're going to look at the start of Israel, the nation of God's faithful people. And we're going to look at the three generations that led to the start of Israel, and how it wasn't as smooth and righteous a start as you might think. So as last time, check out this short video, and then I'll put some instructions on the screen for how to continue.
There once was a man named Abram, who was a descendant of Noah. God told him to move with his wife Sarai, an entire family, away from where they lived. God made a promise: I will make you into a great nation and bless you, and all of the people on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram and his family left. At one point, they stopped, and God told him to look around. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your children. Then, one night, God took Abram outside. Look up and count the stars. This is the number of children you will have. But Abram was already 75 years old, and Sarai was way too old to have children. So they decided that Sarai's servant Hagar should have Abram's child. Hagar became pregnant and gave birth to a son named Ishmael. Yet God told Abram again, you will be the father of many nations. God changed their names to Abraham and Sarah and promised that it would be through Sarah that God's blessing would come. Exactly as God promised, Sarah became pregnant, giving birth to a son named Isaac. When Isaac was still a young boy, God told Abraham to take his son up on a mountain and sacrifice him. Abraham took Isaac, laid him on an altar, and took out his knife to kill him. But an angel stopped Abraham, and God provided a ram to sacrifice in place of Isaac. Years later, Abraham and Sarah died and left everything they owned to Isaac. Isaac married and had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau was Isaac's favorite, and as the oldest, he was set to gain his father's inheritance. But Jacob wanted the inheritance, so he came up with a scheme to trick his father, who was now old and blind, into promising it to him. He dressed in Esau's clothes and put animal skin on his hands, because Esau's hands were very hairy. Confused, Isaac gave his blessing to Jacob and promised him the inheritance instead of Esau. This caused a huge fight, one that almost ended in murder before they went their own ways. Thankfully, they reunited, and God promised to bless Jacob's family. Jacob had 12 sons of his own, and like his father and grandfather before him, Jacob had a favorite son. Little did Jacob know that his favoritism would put his son, Joseph, in danger of being killed by his own brothers.
So how was your See the Story moment this week? What did you draw or create that represents today's stories we're looking at? I invite you to comment, text, send those in however you wish to see what your See the Story creation was. Here is what I have for my See the Story creation. I have these guys wrestling each other, and in between them there's a knife sitting there. So a couple different images put together, and I'm sure the reason I picked these will be made clear to you as we go through this. So the stories and people we're looking at this week are pretty familiar to you, I think, but we're going to look at them a little differently this time around. Usually when we look at Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau, we look at their stories in isolation, separate from each other. But when you look at them as one continuous family story, you find a couple interesting threads running throughout them. And this journey towards establishing Israel starts in Genesis 12. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abraham went as the Lord had told him. That's a pretty amazing promise God makes to Abraham, that he will be a great nation and everyone on earth will be blessed through him. But it required a tremendous act of faith to leave the comforts and life he had there to venture out into a new land, somewhere out there.
Somewhere out there beneath the pale moonlight.
Full of unknowns. Abraham did it though. He packed up and started walking, not without some moments of trying to make God's promise happen his way, however. Multiple times along their journey, God promised Abraham that he would have children who would be blessed and that would bless the earth, one time comparing his descendants to the number of stars in the sky. Abraham at this point did not have any children though, and the older he got, he viewed God's promise through the lens of what his human body could do instead of what God could do. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. Abraham and Sarah, viewing this promise through their human limits, decided that it was not going to come true unless they took matters into their own hands. And this is an interesting parallel to Adam and Eve also. So Eve decided to eat the fruit first, then gave it to Adam, who could have faithfully refused, but he didn't. Same thing, Sarah came up with the plan, then proposed it to Abraham, who could have faithfully refused, but he didn't. And that led to a son by Hagar named Ishmael. Now, unfortunately, by acting on their own, they created a volatile family situation where Sarah and Hagar couldn't get along and didn't treat each other in any respectful or loving way. And through all this, as Abraham and Sarah got even older, God continued to promise Abraham that they would have a son together. As these promises continue, Abraham and Sarah both laugh at God in unbelief that it will happen, as they are what is normally considered to be too old to have any children anymore. But when God makes a promise, he fulfills it, as he eventually did for his promise to them. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. They have an amazing celebration and recognition that God has fulfilled his promise. Unfortunately, they also learned that when we try to make God's plans happen on our terms, in our way, some problems result. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Through their plan with Hagar, it led to jealousy and resentment between Hagar and Sarah. And as we see here, Sarah let these feelings drive her towards a show of favoritism and elitism. Sadly, a thread that sows its way through their generations. Well, then comes one of the most famous stories in the Bible, where God tests Abraham by asking him to sacrifice Isaac. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole story. Most of you know it anyway. But what I want to look at is, why would God ask this of Abraham? Why promise Abraham a son? Give him one after so many years of waiting, only to then command him to sacrifice his son.
What's the point?
If you go back through Abraham's life, the one constant area where Abraham struggled fully trusting God was in him having a son. God needed to see that Abraham was finally ready to move beyond that attachment, to trust and serve God faithfully no matter what. And that's why just at the moment Abraham had committed to following God's command, as he raised that knife, God stopped him. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham had proved his complete trust and faithfulness to God through this trial, establishing himself as that pillar of faithfulness God would build his nation through. I'm not actually going to talk too much about Isaac, his son. The main thing to know with Isaac and his wife Rebekah is that they had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau was born first and thus stood to inherit the birthright and blessing from Isaac. However, just as Sarah displayed favoritism for Isaac over Ishmael, Isaac and Rebekah also displayed favoritism between their sons, Isaac favoring Esau Rebekah favoring Jacob. Jacob was very opportunistic and devious and cunning, which he likely at least partly learned from his mother, who showed how opportunistic and cunning she could be when Isaac was ready to pass on his blessing. She crafted plans to have her favorite, Jacob, be able to steal Esau's birthright and blessing. And then when Esau was plotting to murder Jacob in vengeance, she made plans for him to escape into hiding. The next many years of Jacob's life are full of more opportunism and cunning and deception, both by him to others and others to him. Jacob had lived his entire life relying only on his own wits, his own cunning, tactics that were intended to give him the best result. Again, this thread of selfishness that runs from Abraham and Sarah down through the generations. But then, Jacob had a moment. In his travels, he was now heading towards the land his brother Esau controlled at God's command. Yep, Esau, who last he knew was plotting to kill him. Backed into a seemingly hopeless corner now, Jacob was using every trick he could think of to try and essentially bribe Esau into peace.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
While his bribes were trekking to Esau overnight, Jacob, opportunistically, stayed behind to sleep. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Now, this seems like a strange passage. What is the point of this wrestling event? Jacob had the birthright and blessing, and a promise from God to be with Jacob as he returned home to his relatives. However, Jacob had never really relied on God, only on his own wits, his own deception, his own tactics, his own opportunism. Now, though, Jacob was at a point where those things would no longer be enough. He had gone as far in life as he could on his own ability. He had hit the wall, and he knew it. So as he was implementing these last of his plans, he offered to God what is likely the most passionate and most desperate prayer he had ever offered, recognizing his own hopelessness. So God arrived to help him, but not without taking him through a similar trial to what Abraham faced. He faced a trial that was built to show how weak his supposed strengths were compared to the power of God. The passage simply says that they wrestled till daybreak, but if you've ever watched a wrestling match, think about how this fits Jacob. Wrestlers are all about taking advantage of opportunities, trying to deceive your opponent into making a mistake, relying on your wits to outmaneuver them. Jacob had likely spent all night using every trick and strategy he could think of. Only to, at best, reach a standstill, or so he thought. That's when God showed him with one touch that his reliance only on himself was completely worthless and hopeless in this match, and that it would be worthless against Esau, as he was now disabled going into that confrontation. But God didn't just wrestle Jacob to break him. It was also to test his faith, and Jacob passed the test by literally holding on to God, clinging to him as his last hope. As God started to build his nation through Abraham, he now establishes the start of his nation through Jacob, who he renames Israel. And yes, Jacob and Esau do meet after this. A friendly meeting of reconciliation, of family. Unfortunately, as we'll see next week, all is still not perfect. Jacob continued this thread of family favoritism with one of his 12 sons. But as always, God can use our failures for his greatness, right? So now's your time to join the story for this week by sharing maybe what was most meaningful for you from what we've looked at. Which character are you most like from these stories, and how? If you had to wrestle with God over something, what would it be? And maybe you're wrestling right now over something. What area of your life do you feel like God would put you through a trial to overcome? What's that one area that you don't fully rely on God for? So I invite you to comment, text, however you wish to send in thoughts on these, questions you have, or just ways to help pray for you in these areas. Trials will come your way to test and build your faith in God. They will be some of the hardest parts our journey in the Christian life takes, but they will also be the most blessed if we invite them, embrace them, and trust Him. And I'll see you all on the next part of our journey.